Today we're going to be talking about what were the cultural implications of the Enlightenment. So, although the Enlightenment is often viewed as a period of exceptional development in human intellect, its cultural impacts imply a darker undertone of the Enlightenment. So first, before we get into cultural impacts of the Enlightenment, we need to understand what the heck the Enlightenment was. And David Bornstein gives us a good description of the Enlightenment when he says that it was, quote, a period in history where fanciful thinking gave way to a more rational understanding of cause and effect. People during this time really focused on their mind, what their mind could think, what their mind could do, and the motto during the Enlightenment was that, quote, people needed to have the courage to use their own understanding. But people, modern thinkers such as Peter Thiel, who's involved with Facebook, he really understood the Enlightenment in a different light. He didn't think of it as progress. He thought of it rather as a breaking down of rationality that used to be based in generational tradition. And people like him say that the Enlightenment kind of failed and it focused too much on human rational thinking and didn't focus really on humans anymore. So the Enlightenment is a period that starts after the Puritan Revolution. With Revolution, Europe began to really reset. They had to rebuild, rethink everything, and Enlightenment comes along and Europe changes. It becomes this really, this people based on rationality. And so our first point, our points are that first, the Enlightenment shaped our ideas about philosophy and the physical world. Second, it transformed our perspectives on the arts and aesthetics. And thirdly, it transformed our social behavior and how we view hierarchy. So, firstly, the Enlightenment really shaped a philosophy about the physical world, and it reshaped our philosophy and what we thought about the physical world, two separate things. So we have this really famous, he was kind of pre-Enlightenment philosopher. His name is Rene Descartes, and he based his philosophy on rationality and reason, which are the foundations of the Enlightenment. And he was a Christian, and he really wanted to understand his faith and what he believed through rationality instead of emotion, as people like Bernard of Clairvaux did. So he really focused on trying to root his beliefs in what could be seen and what could be observed about humans and about the natural worlds that we live in. And he famously says that, I think, therefore I am. So this is his philosophy. So he really based his philosophy on human reason and really tried to rationalize his faith, which was one of the things that happened during the Enlightenment. And then we also get a new understanding of the physical worlds that we live in. Isaac Newton, who famously discovered gravity, I guess discovered, because it's always been around. He didn't invent it, that would be God. But yeah, he discovers gravity, and he really with the discovery of gravity, he explains the world through nature and science instead of supernatural things that people before him thought that the world, like how the world worked, was all supernatural and in the spiritual realm, and something that couldn't be understood by humans. But Newton says, no guys, we have this thing called gravity that keeps us standing, keeps us stationary, and this helps us understand the world we live in. And John Maynard Renes says that, quote, Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians, end quote. So that's how enlightenment shaped our physical world and our philosophy. People like Rene Descartes and Isaac Newton. And then secondly, it transformed our perspective on art and our aesthetics. So there was, as obviously I said before, there was a shift towards rationality, and this can be seen even through Enlightenment art. We have a composer, one of the greatest composers of the Baroque era, John Sebastian Bach, and he was influenced by the Enlightenment, and we see this in his music. He wrote a piece called the Crab Canon, in which can be seen evidence of Enlightenment influence. This piece could be played forwards, obviously, backwards. It could be played forward and backward together, and it could also be played like in flipped. It could basically be, the notes could be played in every possible order that you could think of, and this is kind of a crazy piece to write, and it's a piece that's based really on rationality, and so people like Bach show us how the Enlightenment structures of order really influenced art of the time period, and also architecture. We have this Venetian architect, Andrea Palladio, and he focused his building projects on symmetry and perspective and on the ancient techniques, and his style developed and is known for its rational techniques today. So this kind of architecture is called Palladianism, and the contribution of Venice to British art article or whatever says that, quote, in Palladian architecture, they found the spirit of the ancient world. The architecture's imitation recalled the political spirit of its historical background, which is obviously the ancient background. So we even see Enlightenment influence in stuff like architecture. And then lastly, Enlightenment changed social behavior and social hierarchy and our thoughts behind that. So rationality was viewed as kind of the source of knowledge and wisdom, and people prioritized ethics. And we have two ethical, I don't know what the word for this is, I have it here. Ethical approaches that come from the Enlightenment, and this shows how people began to focus on social behavior, which I just think is so interesting. So we have utilitarianism and Kantianism, two ethical approaches that emerged during the Enlightenment. And basically, Kantianism believes that actions should not be based on consequence. Our decisions and our actions should be based on the values behind those actions. So, in other words, Kant believes that that everyone should follow a universal set of principles and guidelines and base our decisions off of those guidelines. So for everyone in the world, those guidelines should be the same, and we should base everything we do off of those principles. And utilitarianism, on the other hand, thought that our actions should be based on the consequences that they lead to. So actions, according to utilitarianism, are measured and decided based on how much happiness they will produce, or trying to produce the least amount of unhappiness. That sounded really confusing, I'm sorry. But basically, utilitarianism says that our actions should be based on the consequences that will come from them, and we should seek in all of our actions to make the least amount of unhappiness. So we should, that's as well as I can explain utilitarianism. Education was influenced by the Enlightenment, and people like Rousseau, the guy that really thought that people were a blank slate, he kind of advocated for a different kind of education than the education of his time. He said that children, firstly, they shouldn't be educated formally till the age of 12, and he thought that education should be done using sensory. It should be done outside, so children are outside interacting with nature, and he focused more on learning experience, and it makes sense coming from a guy who's like, children are blank slates, we're all born as blank slates. So obviously his ideas for education are going to be based off of that, and he wants to change the education of his time. And then the last kind of social change we see is in feminism, and we have Mary Wollstonecraft, who was a female philosopher, whose work focused on women and their role in society, and she reflects Enlightenment ideals, because she's interested in how gender roles and human relationships in society are connected. And she gives us this, she says this about the prevailing opinion of women. She says that, quote, they were created rather to feel than to reason, and that all the power they obtain must be obtained by charms and weakness. So she's saying that this is how society views us women, as people that can only gain power through charms and weakness, instead of as rational beings. And so people like her kind of give us modern feminism today. So thanks, Mary. And yeah, so that's how we see cultural implications of the Enlightenment. We see, firstly, shifting ideas about philosophy and the physical world that we live in. That's point one. And then secondly, we see a transformed perspective on arts and aesthetics of the time. And then thirdly, social behavior is transformed. And yeah, so that's how the cultural implications of the Enlightenment. I will be back soon to tell you about the political implications of the Enlightenment. Oh joy. Okay, bye. Have a good week.